All right, so this can be a little bit of a tricky subject for me to talk about, but I'm going to try to do my best. Tomi Adeyemi's Children of Blood and Bone is very forward-facing with its theme. The author went around and was very open with the themes that she was trying to accomplish with her book. And if the themes were not made apparent enough in the story, they also are reiterated at the end in the author's notes. The primary subject of Children of Blood and Bone is the Black experience through history. Throughout that entire first book, the themes are extremely transparent at points, so much so that it almost feels like the characters are giving a speech to people in the modern day instead of just talking inside the context of the story that they're in. Now, it's very common for science fiction or fantasy stories to include some kind of subtle or overt messages about modern political or social themes. And like I said, they can be varying degrees of forward-facing with those themes. And this book is an example of it's very obvious. And if you didn't pick it up from the book itself, the author is very, very adamant that this is the themes of the book. And the experiences that are being described, the kind of history of the Black experience and the feelings of the characters in the story are not something that I can personally relate to, but that's one of the most wonderful things about reading. It's one of the known benefits of reading is allows us to get inside another person's head and be able to empathize with the things that they're feeling. This is one of the great reasons I love books, and I was interested and excited. And through this story, I was able to get into the mind of these main characters in Children of Blood and Bone, and I was able to experience the cruelty and the oppression that these characters face in the story that they're in. Instead of being judged by the content of their character or really anything about them in the story, there is a certain group of people that is essentially just judged by the color of their hair ultimately. At the beginning of the book, magic is entirely dead, but those people that would be able to hold magic have white hair. And the people with white hair are treated as dirt. They're systematically hunted by the government, and if they're not killed, they are constantly beat down and money is stolen from them to where they just can't succeed in society. We, through the characters in the story, get to experience firsthand just very brutal cruelty. We get to meet characters and start to like them, young characters, children, and then watch them get murdered. The book is extremely brutal and extremely dark in many, many points. I feel like it is impossible to not feel enraged at the injustice that the characters face in these books. And by the end of the book, the author in the author's notes takes care to say that these things still can happen today. And they point out instances where the modern justice system, which is supposed to have the job of protecting citizens, unfairly oppresses these people and can kill them. When someone is tasked with protecting a group of people and they don't do so, and in fact they actually oppress those people, that is evil and it is rage-inducing. Through this book, we're able to see a different perspective of that, where we can feel the fear and the rage and the sympathy with these characters as they go through this sort of just absolutely horrible, evil cruelty. These are the main themes in Children of Blood and Bone, and I think that they come across really strongly, and they evoke very strong emotions in the way that they're intended to. Now let's talk about some of the other positives. The world building, or at least the world that the story is based in, it takes place in a place called Orisha. And listen, I love European fantasy. I do. I love old man wizards. I love all of the tropes that come with the Lord of the Rings style inspired fantasy. But hey, there is like mythological characters and stories from all facets of the globe. And I love the idea that we are living in a time when lots of people's ideas and mythologies and different types of fantasy stories are being told. In Children of Blood and Bone, we get to see like an African style thing. The author, Tomi Adeyemi, has like made direct comparisons to like Black Panther, which I love the movie Black Panther, one of my favorite of the Marvel movies. And in this story, we get a different kind of fantasy setting with these like, it's a different magic system and there's different deities, and it's very interesting and fascinating to get to learn about like a different culture in a fantasy setting. I love it. I'm definitely looking forward to more things like this in the future. I know that there's like more explorations in other books these days of like Japanese fantasy and Norse mythology and all of these things. That's all sounds awesome. Now we gotta talk about the sequel, Children of Virtue and Vengeance. Now, before I transition too hard, I want to emphasize maybe this book isn't for me. I thought it was based on the first book, maybe this book isn't for me. And if you like this book, enjoy it. But what you are about to hear is my fairly unfiltered opinion. I filtered it some, especially from spoilers. Before I get into this too deep, if you like this video so far, please give me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more reviews from me, hit that subscribe button. You can hit the bells to get notification about every video that I post. So let's just go into it. Now, with all the things that I said about the themes and the way that we can empathize with this plight, I want to take a step back from that, because the book, Children of Blood and Bone, and I'm not going to really talk about spoilers here, but it ends in a very different place than it begins. And some major things happen that ultimately affect the world. And while that first book has those themes that I mentioned before that come across very strongly and very overtly, the second book is a very different book. The way that the first book ends, a lot of these direct, heavy themes are kind of dealt with, we'll say. And the second book starts off with some, we'll just say some weird things. Firstly, the book kind of feels like it should be an epic fantasy, but almost the entirety of these two books takes place over maybe the span of a month and a half. And one of my biggest complaints about this series is that it just doesn't do time. It doesn't handle the passage of time very well at all. If a character has to travel on a long journey for multiple days, it skips over everything. And I realize that some people like travel journeys, travel stories more than other people, but when you're trying to emphasize that the distance is a big deal and your characters who have issues to resolve don't even talk to each other on the trip, and it kind of skips over all of that, it feels weird. The first book had this problem, and the second book, it's even worse. Let's talk about another problem with Children of Virtue and Vengeance. Every single event in the plot feels like a plot device and doesn't feel like it's part of a real story. And I am not exaggerating when I say that there are so many concessions to what feels like it should be the natural progression of the story. Like, I am all for mysterious magic systems, but when your magic system just changes constantly to meet the dramatic plots of the story with no explanation and no satisfying conclusion except heightening the tension and drama, it feels very forced and it pulls me all the way out of the story. And now, I don't want to rant too much. We got to talk about the worst thing about Children of Virtue and Vengeance. I see this book everywhere, and the more I see it, the more I get frustrated by it, because this book does something that, okay, so first of all, the first book was so heavy with its themes and so strong with its themes that I overlooked some, we'll say, very, very bad implementations of some specific, very bad tropes. I don't want to talk about them specifically because I don't want to spoil things, but there are some tropes that are not loved by most people that are handled extremely poorly. And I overlooked them for the sake of the theme, and I was hoping that the way the first book ended, that the second book would be able to pick up and move forward in a positive direction. I was really looking forward to this book, but oh my word, it takes the worst sections from the first book and carries those into the second book in a way that drives me insane. And it has to do with the way that these tropes, bad tropes generally, are handled poorly, and most importantly, I hate every character in this story by the end of the second book. Every single character. And I don't think you're supposed to. Some books you're supposed to do that. I don't know if you're supposed to or not here, but I do. And frankly, I stopped caring about every character so hard by the end of this book. And let me give you a big reason why. So good characters change over time. Good characters learn things over time, and they are shaped by the experiences that they go through. And generally they learn more as they continue, and they develop relationships that are meaningful with each other. Let me just straight up say this. Every single character, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this. Every single character in the book Children of Virtue and Vengeance, at almost every single critical point in the story, makes the absolute stupidest decision at every possible point that you could possibly make. If there is a character whose goal is to de-escalate a situation, they will choose the most violent, abhorrent, obnoxious act they could possibly do to try to de-escalate the situation, and it blows up in their face, sometimes literally. We have characters that change the entirety of their self-internalized goals at a whim just to make more. I said that every single thing about the magic system alternated to create more drama. Every character in this book makes the stupidest possible decisions to create the most drama in any given situation, to a point where nobody makes sense. Nobody is doing anything logical. If a character says that this is their intended goal, they will leave the situation having done the exact opposite possible thing they should have done. And let me just get this straight, right? Characters make bad decisions in stories. And the best ways that you see this example happen is when you understand a character so well that you understand why they may make a bad decision. Like, what would lead them in their personal motivations, their personal growth journey to make a bad decision. This isn't what happens. Characters are just insanely stupid. It's not like they are making a decision from a passionate place. Here's an example that's not really an isolated incident. Things like this happen throughout this entire second book. A character will come up with an idea of what they think they should do. They will go to a group of people and present said idea and say, I am driven to choose this idea. I think this is the right thing to do, and no one can change my mind. And then the first person that they talk to will make the most obvious objection to the thing that they just committed their life to and say, actually, that's a bad idea, and here's why. And the character will be so flabbergasted. They have never even considered one flaw to their plan, the most obvious flaws to their plan, that their entire argument falls apart, and they'll basically go into a mini depression because they didn't think of the literally first thing that would be opposed to the ideas that they've come up with. Characters will say they want to do something. As soon as someone says no, they say, well, I guess I can't do that. There's no drive, except when it's to do something even stupider that heightens the tension. Literally every single decision that the characters make in this book are to heighten dramatic tension, but it's done so poorly that I stopped caring, and I hate read most of this book. It is not an exaggeration to say the entire book is this way. Characters are dumb. Tropes are handled badly. Everything is for plot devices, and they don't feel good. The elements of themes that were so strong in the first book, because of the nature of what happens in the world, are completely unraveled to the point where nothing that mattered about those themes in the first book are even relevant in this second book. And did I mention how moronic the characters are? I don't recommend it. I don't recommend reading this book. I don't recommend reading it just to see how bad it is. I don't recommend it at all because I literally, from the 20% mark on, I think I just hate read the entire thing. They introduced another bad trope that was handled poorly. They reused a bad trope. And once again, every character in the story has no brain. I don't think I can emphasize that enough. Now, this is supposed to be the second book in a trilogy. Do we get a satisfying conclusion? Absolutely not. We don't. There's a place that the book may be heading at the very end, literally like the last page, that may be going somewhere potentially interesting. Trying to go back to the themes that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Maybe. But frankly, I have so little hope in that idea, I can't even. Now, I've seen this in multiple places. There are people calling this author the next J.K. Rowling, and maybe she can get there. Maybe. This book is nowhere near good book status, much less classic book status. If you guys want me to actually talk spoilers at some point, let me know, and I may make a spoiler rant review of this, but honestly, at this point, I don't think you should read it. I apologize for anyone that got the idea about reading this series when I talked about the first book, and when I was excited to read the second book. I'm sorry that people thought that meant it was going to be good. I was truly excited for this book. I was like the first person to get it from my library network, and I was extremely excited, and I rushed through it. And by rush through it, I mean I tried to rush through it, but I was getting so mad at it that it slowed my entire reading progress for all of December. I'm giving this book 2 out of 5 stars. I recommend you do not read it. I especially recommend you don't read it if you liked the characters at the end of the first book. If you liked the heavy-handed messaging that was in the first book, and you valued that kind of empathy that it gave you, or you were just happy that there was a book with this kind of message, don't read this book. It's a waste of time. Once again, I'm sorry if anything I said made you want to spend money on this book specifically. I apologize for that. I want you to know that my Kindle now has ads for this book, and when I go into stores, I spot it everywhere, and my wife now makes it a point to point this book out to me, knowing that it will trigger me, because it like I said, it was not only bad enough to make me angry and start hating all the characters that I liked at the end of the first book, it pretty much made me want to stop reading for a large chunk of December. And listen, I still read it pretty fast, but it threw me off, man. You threw off my groove, man. Thank you for watching this video. Normally I do like super positive reviews. This is the first or maybe second negative review I've ever done. I'm just trying to be as honest as I can. I don't like to be a hater. I really don't. But I don't want people thinking that I just love every book that I read either. I'm sorry if you had to sit through this with me. Thank you for watching this video. Once again, remember to give us a thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe if you want to see more videos. I hope that you are reading something better than this book. Now you go and have a nice day and a Merry Christmas. To kids from 1 to 92. Although it's been said many times, many